Let's get started. I mean, I took
Yeah.
a brief overview, kind of what you had sent over about what you wanted to talk about. I assume the majority of the things that you're angry about is crime, right? Crime rates going up. Correct me if I'm wrong. Crime rates going up. You had mentioned in there something about, the correlation between crime rates going up and maybe defunding the police, movements across the country. Is that, I know that's crunching what you said up into a tiny little ball. So what did you want to come in here and talk about?
Well, I think those are all good topics. And I think we would say part of the cause of crime going up is, in our urban areas, we've made bad bail reform, criminal justice reform decisions. And, I think at the time those decisions were being made, they were decisions that anyone with common sense on criminal justice history would say, hey, this is going to cause crime to go up. And so now we're seeing exactly what was predicted happening, and people are acting shocked and surprised. So, and I think after what happened here in Texas, we would make a distinction between bad bail reform and good bail reform, and Texas being the latter.
Well, let me go ahead and put up are you a bail bondsman? Is that correct?
No, I am an attorney.
Okay.
But I specialize in bail law, and I'm on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, their legislative team. I testified before the legislature on bail issues, stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let me say this. I'm completely against the cash bail system. I don't know if Paco shares my agreement on this, but I'm completely against the cash bail bond system. And as an attorney who works with bail bonds, but I'm sure you're aware of some areas in the country that have gone away from a cash bail system. Washington, D.C. is one of them. And instead of utilizing a bail bondsman, right, who you pay a portion of the cost of the bail, and the bail bondsman puts up the rest with, his reputation on the line that you're going to show back up in court. Usually it's 10% down. I know it differs between circumstances, and all that other stuff. Instead, what I know they have in Washington, D.C. is, there's a group of people who look over you and look over your history, your flight risk, your patterns, your criminal history, and they make a decision whether or not you're a flight risk or not. And of course, the severity of your crime is taken into effect as well. And they put together a risk assessment, which then goes to the judge. And when you go in front of the judge for your bail hearing, instead of it being, can you afford to get out? The judge may set the bond at $17,000, whatever the case may be, which normally happens. The judge gets that risk assessment form done by this group, and then she makes a decision, or he makes a decision, to let you out based on those factors. I'm assuming, since you represent the bail bonds, that you work with bail bondsmen, you don't agree with this system. You don't think that system is a good idea. But I would love to hear your opinion on it and what your thought process is on that, because I know as developed countries go, we're one of the last ones that actually has a cash bail system in place.
Well, I mean, sure. Of course, I disagree with you. I disagree with you strongly. I think that everywhere where reforms like you've mentioned have taken effect or gone into place, crime has increased. And I think there's a strong correlation to that. And it could be just the ineptitude of the government, but I don't believe so. I think there's bigger issues going on there that you need to recognize. First, let's just attack the risk assessment on its own. That was, well, wait, let's back up. Our big problem is, how do we process large numbers of people through our urban quickly and efficiently? Historically, if we do individual assessment or individual magistration, that meets all the constitutional requirements. The problem is it's very costly, expensive, and our big urban areas have never done that. They've always looked for ways to divert people from individual magistration. Historically, it's been through a bail schedule, which means if you can post the amount of the standardized bond for that type of offense, you get out, you skip magistration, and you go to arraignment. The problem we have is the attacks that we've been seeing the last few years has been attacked using bail schedules. Harris County was sued for not having procedures to protect the poor. They set up procedures to do that, but then they decided to go a whole new route. And the whole new route was just simple release. So the problem we have right now is, the alternative to individual magistration in our large urban areas isn't a risk assessment. It's just simple release. If in New York, they did it for a while. Harris County, they're doing it. California, they tried to do it. If you're just arrested for a certain offense, you you get out for $100 without seeing a magistrate, and we're tying the hands of our judges so that nobody's the gatekeeper, and we have career criminals taking advantage of the criminal justice system, organized crime taking advantage of the criminal justice system, and we see that across the country. And then if we talk about your risk assessment specifically, that was supposed to be the end all be all that was going to replace bail schedules. And it was just going to be an automatic push of the button. It was going to tell judges whether to release somebody or whether they were a risk. And it's been an abject. The most recent studies on risk assessment said they should not be a part of the criminal justice system. The largest digital companies in the world came out with a joint statement saying, hey, algorithms are great for predicting what groups will do. They're terrible for predicting what individuals will do. And because as a part of their assessment, they look at your group makeup, there's a racial element in predicting what you will do in the future. And so the conclusion was you should not be using risk assessments as part of criminal justice reform. And so I think, go ahead.
No, you're making some good points. So what we're looking at right now is you're basically saying that an algorithm is making the decision of whether or not a person should be released on their own recognizance versus a particular person reviewing that particular file and reviewing that person's history to make that decision. Was this all being done by computer software, or were people actually reviewing these cases?
Well, I don't think we should have a computer making that decision. I think the point
is
we shouldn't let a risk assessment make that determination. The problem that we have in our urban areas is a bigger problem than that. It's just how do you physically get a large group of people from point A to point B through the county jail? And that's where the failures are coming. That's where when we say, hey, we want the judge to be the gatekeeper, we do. I think everybody agrees to that. But the problem in our urban areas is there are large number of people who are being arrested, and we just don't have the capability to do that. And we don't have the money to be able to spend to do that with everything else that we're doing. So they're looking for alternatives. And the alternatives that they're imposing is just simple release. That's abject failure. It's failed everywhere it's happened. Failed in New York, even during the pandemic, they revoked it, part of it during the middle of the pandemic. In Harris County, crime's going up. Everybody agrees it's going up. They just disagree. The supporters won't agree. It's because of bail reform. The DA just came out with a report saying, yes, it's because of the bail reform we did on misdemeanors that crime is going up, and nobody wants to address it because what you're saying, the concept of the way it should work, hey, is a great idea. It's the implementation where it's completely failed. And so what do you
think should be fixed? What do you think that system could ever work? Or
I don't think the government can run a system. I don't think a government can ever do that.
I don't think the government can run anything. They can't even run themselves.
We can attack the bail industry just like any industry. We could always become better. But this is an industry that's been doing its job for over 200 years in the United States. Also has the lowest failure to appear rate of any system in use, even in your vaulted Washington, D.C. that you think works well, which doesn't because it has high crime. So it's not causing crime to go down. And so what you have to realize is that anything that slows down appearance rates or causes failures to appear to rise, that slows down the criminal justice system because you have to wait for them to come back to the system. And we have the lowest. So we can get your case resolved quicker. We can get justice to victims quicker just by using a surety bond over a PR bond.
You can get money quicker. Right?
Hey, what we're talking about is the constitutional requirements. The Constitution says that you have to have these elements for the requirements of the Constitution been met. It has been completely litigated that a judge's job is to set bail, the amount of bail based upon the risk of the defendant. Once the court does that and they do an individual assessment of their risk and sets bail, then the constitutional requirements have been met. And so it's a constitutional system. We've had two courts of appeals in the federal circuit, including the Fifth Circuit, say bail is constitutional. And so now we're just arguing, well, it just isn't fair. Well, we got to find a system that is the fairest to get people through as quickly as possible. All the alternatives that have been tried have failed. And so why are we not using what has worked for over 200 years? Why are we attacking something that's worked for over 200 years and we don't have an alternative?
I think the main reason why they're attacking is they're looking at the disparity between, you have two different people who get arrested for the same thing. right? You have two people get arrested for the same thing. One person can afford to post bail, one person can't. So one person gets out, they can afford an attorney, one can't, one gets assigned. And I'm not here to discuss the differences between paid attorneys and court appointed attorneys. One person has to sit in jail and wait for their hearing. The other person can get out and continue working whatever they need to do to earn money. You have two people arrested for the same crime. One can afford to post bail, the other can't. And the idea is it's a classist system. And it benefits those who have additional money in their pockets to pay the bond versus people who don't. And I think that's the way they're looking at it. I mean, looking at the cash bail system, you're saying this has worked for a long time. And you're right. It's been in the United States for, I don't even know how long. Yeah. So you look at it that way. So how do you make the system work for the poor and the rich equally?
Well, how you make the system work for the poor and the rich is you comply with the Constitution. Now, I will say this: your argument sounds like it's a good, sound argument, and that's one of the arguments that's been used to attack the bail industry. The problem is when you're attacking the bail industry usually people are thinking, well, first-time offenders. There's not any first-time offenders in jail in our urban areas anywhere in Texas. I promise that can't get out, because a first-time offender, everybody wants to bend over backwards. If they can't post a bond, they get a PR bond. We're not talking about first-time offenders. And, it's kind of ironic that we're having this discussion about, who can afford and who cannot afford, because the bail industry is now getting under attack for the opposite argument. Well, we should be the persons that are being held accountable because people are getting out of jail on a surety bond. I mean, you can't win either way. It's just ridiculous. A bail is set. The court has the ability to determine who gets in or who gets out of jail or who doesn't. They set the bond, and the court always has the ability to lower a bond. And if someone says, hey, I can't afford it, they can go to the court and ask for a reduction. And those happen every day. I would say under the current climate, they get granted a lot of the time. Most of the time they do now. Because right now we've got some requirements in the federal, in Harris County where they have to have a hearing. If they say I can't afford a bond, they have to have a hearing within 48 hours. And so, but the Constitution doesn't require that it be granted. The Constitution requires an individual assessment. And if the judge reviews their history, and I think the most crucial review of the change of the criminal justice system is a requirement that we review criminal histories in Texas before we set bail, which when I tell people that we weren't required to do that until this legislative session, it goes into effect in January.
That blows my mind.
People are like, well, that just makes common sense. The reason why we're not doing it is because we don't have the technology to do it. And so we're now
so what you were saying is bail here. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to go back to this point you made. So what you were saying is just until this most recent legislative session, judges were making bail decisions without any assessment of the person's criminal history?
They're not required by law to review their criminal history. There was a case that said they could do it in their discretion. But, the problem is in most counties, they were only reviewing the criminal history from the county because there wasn't anything for them to look at that showed a statewide criminal history. So unless it was disclosed to them, they weren't seeing it. Like, the reason we just had this Damon Allen Act passed by the Texas legislature is the magistrate, the JP, said that he did not review the criminal history before setting bail. And so once he found out that there was a substantial criminal history, he held the bond insufficient and raised it from $15,000 to $400,000.
Wow, first of all, I didn't know that it wasn't a requirement to review. I would have thought to myself that would have been one of the most important things to review when looking at how much a bail is going to be.
But I do think that's the most important change, and I think also it is the part of the accountability, which is a crucial part of good bail reform. You should not be setting bail. We should have a gatekeeper, and if we have two people arrested for the same crime, doesn't mean the bail should be set in the same amount, because like in Harris County, you've got people that have been arrested 3 or 4 or 5 times, got 5 pending cases. The bail for that person should be a lot higher than a first-time offender. And so,
well, I agree with you. And in the situation that I'm talking about with these two people, the assumption is they're exactly the same. And you mentioned the issue is, okay, we just don't deal with first-time offenders that often. First-time offenders are not. I'm assuming you mean the majority that you deal with on a regular basis. What you're dealing with in the criminal justice system, people who are dealing with the bail bond system 1, 2, or 3 or 4 more times are definitely reoffenders. And I
Well,
get
what
what you're
I'm
saying.
saying is first-time offenders are not stuck in jail. And
Right.
if you are
Unless it's a
someone
violent
who's been
crime.
arrested and you got 3 pending charges and you get a bond set and then you claim that you can't afford it, you're not in jail because you can't afford it. You're in jail because of your criminal history has required that your bond be set at an amount. And if you can't afford that amount, the constitutional requirements have been met.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. The point I was making, and I completely understand your point. The point I was making in these two situations, or these two people are in the exact same situation. You can call them first-time offenders. We can even call them second-time offenders. One happens to have the money to pay. One happens to not. One gets stuck in jail. One's able to walk away. Now, people will go all the way, and I don't go this far. People will go all the way and say that the system is discriminatory to race, because they'll say certain race groups have less wealth and less access to resources to get out of jail. I don't like to make that argument. This has anything to do with the color of somebody's skin. I think it has to do with their economic environment. And the only reason why I think, I look at Washington, D.C., and I look at other countries where you have that assessment, you don't have bail hearing, is it kind of evens the playing field. A poor person gets arrested for the same thing that a well-to-do person gets arrested for. They have equal chance of getting out depending on what they're charged for without their ability to pay. And that's what I'm kind of looking at, because we don't want debtors prisons here in the United States. And I know that we haven't had debtors prisons for an incredibly long time, but not being able to pay a bond, not being able to pay to get out of jail when one person can and one person can't. It's tough for me not to draw similarities between the two. Okay, we're going to jail the poor person because they can't make bail, but we're going to let the well-to-do person off because they can. It just seems like an unfair system to me in that particular state. I don't know Paco's opinion on it. I haven't really given him time to talk. Paco.
You're good. I agree with you, and probably even more to the left on this issue, where it's not just the bail system not working. It's obvious that also the prison system is not working, and that's why we see so many repeat cases. There are just so many broken things to it beyond just bail. But if we stick to bail, I think it's pretty clear that it's an unfair system, whether it's helping process things faster or not. It's just simply unfair when you have two of the same scenario. One can pay, one can't because of their economic status. They're both likely to go and become repeat offenders if they get out. And that just goes back to, we have a bigger problem than just bail. So I also don't see the correlation between the bail system causing the increase in crime. I think it's the whole system overall, the urban communities and how resources are allocated and the support in those communities. Nothing is working.
Well, there's a lot there that's been said by both of you. And one of the things that I kind of want to highlight is the comment, is this a racial problem? We have disproportionate numbers of people who are being arrested from a particular race. And I thank you, Jonathan, for saying that you weren't prepared to go that far. And because I'm going to tell you, I've looked at this issue, I've looked at it extensively. And I think that the better argument is that we've got an urban area problem. If we've got problems in our urban areas that just are so deep. Schools have failed, families have failed. There's no economic opportunity. Drugs are running rampant because of the protests from summer or the summer before that. The existing businesses were destroyed and some of them didn't come back. You've got California now where we've decriminalized certain offenses. So we've got theft. So we've got Walgreens. We've got
I've seen the videos of that petty crime. Yeah,
because their shoplifting rates are so high, they can't afford to be in business. You've got a business in San Francisco that has shoplifting at a rate of $25,000 a day. And so then John, I think Francisco, I think you said Paco, he said we have, why is the bail system correlating with an increase in crime? And I said, there's a real good explanation for that. If you're telling your people that you're getting them arrested, that if they are charged with this crime, they cannot be held, period, then they're seeing that as a green light. Well, we can commit that crime more. Now, eventually it may come to bite them because eventually the criminal justice system will catch up with them. But you've got to keep in mind that these people see that as a green light. They start committing more crime. We start having more arrests. The whole system grows. I mean, in Harris County, they had a presentation to their commissioner's court where there was a recommendation they dismiss between 12 to 18,000 pending felony criminal cases because the system was on the precipice of collapse. And their recommendation was at some point you just gotta, give them up to try to save the system. And so if you don't care, if people show up for court, if the courts get to the point where they don't care because they're so overloaded, they're so backlogged, then you don't need us. But your system, in my opinion, the evidence that we've seen is when you don't have the private surety industry, you have collapse of your criminal justice system because people see that as a green light to go forward and commit more crime.
No, I'm really glad you brought up California, because that has just been such a failure from a criminal justice standpoint, from a law enforcement standpoint. I remember just watching videos of people posting online of people just walking into stores with masks on and just taking things, and there was absolutely nothing the store owners or employees could do to stop them. And that is a scary reality of what a continual decline in what you mentioned, the ability to prosecute, or the ability of the courts to process these cases. And I absolutely do not agree with what's happening in California, or the lax. And you would be better to answer this because you're a lawyer. I am not. But where does that decision lie in California? Who made that decision? Is that the Attorney General that made that decision? I mean, where does that come down to? That decision was made? I'm assuming a vote had to happen, or where did this come from in California? How did this happen?
Well, what happened in California is they did a constitutional amendment or an initiative. They had a vote, and that what they did was they lowered certain crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. And so on its face, that seems like a great idea. But the problem is then once they took those crimes and made them misdemeanors, a lot of the urban areas, because of the amount of cases that are pending, they decided they weren't going to prosecute those crimes anymore. So they went from felony to misdemeanor to no longer being prosecuted. And that's the problem in San Francisco, why you have Walgreens across the city closing and other businesses closing, because they are now sitting ducks to anyone who wants to walk in. You find yourself going to a Walmart in California and everything you want is behind lock and key, and they have fewer employees because they've raised the minimum wage. And so you have to wait to get an employee to come and unlock something so that you can buy it. It's all because of that vote.
And there's also, not just the crime, and I completely understand what you're saying, but there have been so many businesses that are fleeing California, and not just because of what you mentioned, which is definitely the major reasons too, but you also look at the unchecked homelessness, the public camping law, that strayed out of the inner cities out into, affluent suburbs, where people were just wandering the streets, overdosing, doing drugs, leaving syringes laying around. You had not just retail businesses, but you've had lots of businesses move out of California because they're incredibly high tax rate, but also just unsafe environments everywhere around major cities, LA, San Francisco, San Diego, all of those places where it was just unchecked. So and all these people are now moving, as a lot are coming here to Texas. A lot of businesses have moved to places like Florida. A lot of places have moved to places like Tennessee. They're looking for places that are better suited to run their business, less costly to run their business, less taxes, lower restrictions on business. Texas is one of those places. Tennessee is one of those places. Florida is one of those places. But I think when you talk about California and you talk about their failure, and not just to prosecute the crimes that you mentioned just earlier, but there's a failure all over that place. There's a failure in where they're choosing to spend taxes. It's one of the highest taxation rate states in the country, and yet they have the biggest homeless population issue. Nothing's gone for infrastructure. And you talk about urban area issues. Look at Skid Row. Look at downtown Los Angeles. Look at anywhere in LA, really, to be honest with you. You look at a failure to manage an urban area properly with a Democrat-run state. It's been a Democrat-controlled state for as long as I can remember. Mostly Democrat mayors. I think there's a couple Republican ones that are up north, but it's been a completely Democrat-run state for as long as I can remember, and it's absolutely failing. So I completely agree with you on all those points. I think there's way more that's also impacting California on top of it, and this is just kind of the effect a domino effect of everything that's failed at the top, and it's finally made its way down to the fact that the courts are just choosing not to disregard crimes. I think
Well, I think you can look at
outcome.
other areas to see the similar consequences. You see these smart on crime initiatives, and they sound really good on their face. Well, we're not going to prosecute people for drug abuse. We're going to give them to treatment. The problem is treatment's just as expensive as keeping them incarcerated. And so what happens because of the ineptitude of the government in running these types of programs is we decide we're not going to prosecute, we're going to send them to drug rehab, and then we don't have room for them in drug rehab. And so we don't have good drug rehab, it turns into we're just not going to prosecute drug criminals. That's what it becomes in many parts of the country. And I don't think that our good friends on the other side realize that, or I wonder if they care. Maybe that's the whole point. We should decriminalize certain drug crimes. But the problem, and what they fail to realize, is the drug problem is the source of so many other criminal activities.
You're right. Theft,
especially from
theft,
organized crime, career criminals. And so when we give up on the drug fight, when we're just saying, hey, we're not going to prosecute criminals anymore, and we're going to send them to drug rehab, and then we don't have room, and we don't make them go to the programs, then we're just releasing an avalanche. And that's what we're seeing.
Well, Paco, I know you want to jump in on this because Paco has some very strong opinions specifically on the war on drugs. I'm a lot more conservative when it comes to the war on drugs. But I know that Paco has some pretty strong opinions about how he feels that should be handled. So I definitely want to give him a chance to talk, and you respond to him as well.
Yeah, and it just comes from examples. We have been very aggressive and invested a lot of money on the war on drugs here in the States for the last, 40 years. It has taken us nowhere. Crime keeps going up, drug use keeps going up, abuse goes up. It's taking us nowhere. And putting more money into it is not going to fix the problem. Now, we can look at examples around the world. I don't think we have any good examples in the US because, and I agree with both of you, the government can't run anything correctly here. So I don't know that we're going to have any good examples in the States. But we do have examples from other countries around the world where they looked at this problem of crime and drugs differently. They said, first, let's focus on making sure that people have opportunity to have a good life, that have opportunity to do things right for themselves, that they really have equity. When they do that, they start to see lower crime, lower drug use, and they get to a point where they say, hey, you know what, let's decriminalize drug use because we know now that people are in a good place. If they get into drugs, we have a good rehab system that they can go through. And the governments run it differently. Crime rates go down. There is, I believe it's Sweden, where only like 25% of criminals get arrested again within 5 years. Compare that to here in the US. Within 5 years, 77% of people that get arrested, if not higher, are going to get arrested again because our system does not work. We put people in jail, and that prison system makes a lot of money. It has made a lot of people, and it's not helping any of the communities. Putting people in jails in the US does not do anything for crime. The war on drugs does not do anything to prevent more drug use or crime. So we just have a broken system where we're not really helping the community. We're just making people that run the prisons and everything else richer.
Well, let me just say on that, I don't think anybody is running the prisons getting rich running the prison, but I mean, that's a separate issue. We can talk about that another time. But the point I would make, I really come from a very personal position on drugs, and I have a sister who had a really terrible car accident in 1989, and then she started down a 30-year road of prescription drug abuse, other drug abuse. And, I tried for several years to get her arrested because in my mind at the time, I was young attorney then, that was the poor people's drug rehab. And by changing our mentality on that, by, I think our system, we point to Sweden as the great example, but we're really not trying to really follow that model. We're just wanting to decriminalize it, not prosecute people anymore. We're not really doing any of the other things first. We're doing the last thing first. And
Yeah,
so
and
what
that's
we're
very
doing,
important.
yes, and like
Yeah.
we're making it where poor people can't redeem their loved ones because they have no shot. We're making it where the prisons can't hold anybody. They can't be the poor people's drug rehab anymore. And so, I mean, I think I look at the criminal justice system as the last chance. People who failed at every stage, and so they got involved with the criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system should be their last chance to become productive citizens. And we're really taking that away.
Well, I want to touch base real quick because I'll let you keep going. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but there's also a lot more that also goes into drug issues. And you mentioned the car accident situation. That was incredibly prevalent in the 90s and early 2000s. People who had gone through any sort of injury and opiates and everything else that happened, and then all of a sudden the doctors were shutting them off, and they were going out to try to find their own way to manage their pain. But on the other side of that coin, mental illness is a huge driver in using drugs and someone becoming a drug addict. So I look at it that way too. From a top down perspective of treating somebody who is has drug issues or is a drug addict, we need to invest a lot more in mental health too. You go to jail or prison, yeah, you may see a psychiatrist, but you're not going to get the counseling you need to really overcome any of those obstacles, which may then help you live a more productive and meaningful life. So I think there's also other things that are not being addressed when we're dealing with addicts and drug addicts as well from that system standpoint. That I think we
I
should do a
agree
lot
with you.
better on.
I agree with you completely on that point. I would just say that our largest mental health facilities in Texas right now are within our jails. Our Harris County Jail is one of the largest mental health facility in the state. And that really I would just say that is not, if we could address the mental health issue that is running rampant in our jail, we wouldn't have jail overcrowding anywhere in the country. The problem is, and that has nothing to do with the bail industry. The bail industry is not contributing to that, not causing that. And so if we would just address that one thing, but again, it comes down to money. It's cheaper to allocate, in I think people's minds, money for prisons or county jails than it is for their taxpayers to agree to give large sums of money to a mental health facility. And I think that's been the mentality in this country since Reagan, and that's a sad state of our country.
I think that's a great point, right? It is a lot easier to sell a prison to put people who commit crime than to sell a mental facility to help people prevent from doing crime. So I think I agree with you a lot there, Ken. We have to tackle the other issues before trying to go all crazy with bail and the prison system, because it's overcrowded, it's overwhelmed. A lot of people are into crime, and if we don't tackle the other pieces first, this problem just becomes a vicious circle.
Yes, and when we say, well, we need bail reform, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easy target, and you don't fix anything. In fact, from what I'm seeing, you make the situation worse. I would argue that all the reforms, or many of the reforms that have been tried, except for the ones that were just done in Texas that are in the process of going into effect, have been what I would call bad bail reform, which have made the criminal justice system worse. And then shockingly, they don't understand why crime is going up. I would just add on the mental health issue that I don't know what the solution is for that. I don't see a plan that's even in development anywhere across the United States to address mental health. And also the bigger problem is, okay, so you were released from jail. You got off your psychiatric medications. You commit a crime. You go back to jail. You get back on your psychiatric medications. You calm back down. We can't force someone to take their medications when they're not in jail. And if while they're not in jail and they don't take their medications, they are a danger to society. And I mean, we're in a catch-22. I'm of viewpoint that we have to put public safety over, I guess, their issue, because we can't keep going in this vicious cycle of release, go off medications, commit a crime, go back in jail, get on your medications, get released. I mean, that's just a vicious cycle. We have to have public safety take priority in that situation, in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned something huge. You mentioned that the largest health facility here in Texas is a jail facility.
Yes, sir. It's in the Harris County Jail.
That is there is indicative of the problem. Our largest health facility shouldn't be a jail. Our largest health facility should be somewhere that's easily accessible by people. Yep. And then to set your point as well, when you mentioned, hey, they go in jail, they get their medication, and they leave. Okay, you're giving them their medication in jail free of charge. You set somebody out into the world immediately following their incarceration with probably no job. I'm not going to say there are people who leave with jobs, probably no jobs and very little resource. How are they going to afford to be able to go to a doctor and then on top of that afford their medication? I have seen many people who use jail, like you mentioned. I need a place to go get clean and I need a place to go get my medication. A lot of people sometimes who are diabetic, I've seen it outside of drug use. Some people who are diabetic, who are homeless, who know that they go to jail, they'll get insulin. They know if they go to jail, they'll get the medication that they need. That is such a sad state of affairs. And you mentioned, you are correct. We can't force people to take their medication when they leave jail. But for a lot of people, it's the fact that they can't get it once they leave jail. They just don't have access to go get that medication that they need. And it's way cheaper and far less hoops to jump through for them to go find drugs again than it is for them to go find the prescription medication that they need to keep going. So I don't know if you're aware of a system, and I could be speaking out of turn here because, again, you know far more about this than I do. But could there be a system where there are referrals from jails, from psychiatrists who can refer these people who are getting out of jail to real world doctors so they can follow up with these patients, set up appointments, set up medication for them, so at least they could get their medication when they get out? And do you think that would help assist in this revolving door system that you talked about?
I think in the idea world, or idea, not ideal, just from the idea perspective, I think it's a good idea. The problem is, once again, we're relying upon the government to implement such a system. And I would argue that this is the worst time for it, because during COVID, I mean, I don't know if y'all were seeing them, but I saw many articles talking about the dramatic increase of mental health disorders during COVID, during the isolation. There were some articles talking about the unknown, or what the public didn't know about COVID is we had probably just as many deaths from suicide, or approaching as many deaths from suicide as we did from COVID. I think the number of people that have mental diseases that probably need assistance at this time, if we were to be honest, is bigger than anything that we could ever accomplish or accommodate. And so the problem is funding. I mean, we can't fund the jails. I mean, if you talk about, the problems that we're having, we've got criminal justice, or we've got crime increasing, we've got mental health increasing, and we've got social programs increasing, and we have all these things that are calling for spending tax dollars. And we're not unlimited. We have to set priorities, and that's where we're having problems. Because so now we have a call in the criminal justice system that we don't want to do bail schedules anymore, even though they've been held constitutional. We want to just do simple release, and we're shocked now that that's causing crime to increase. And so we don't want to spend the money to do individual magistration, which we know satisfies all the requirements of the Constitution and is a good gatekeeper. And so we're looking for alternatives, and none of the alternatives they're looking at have worked. And so we're just in a catch-22 situation. And I don't know how much longer that will continue, because another thing that we haven't even talked about that's causing crime to increase is, we're not trying criminal cases. We're just now starting in our criminal justice system to put people to court, to trial, if they won't plead guilty. And that's cause of crime to increase as well, because people are not going to trial. They're not being forced to resolve their cases. And then when they think, okay, it's coming up, so I might as well go on a last hurrah. I think that's one of the things we haven't talked about that's caused crime to increase.
So you mentioned the thing you just mentioned at the end there, because for us to transition on to the next subject. So you're mentioning these are people who are awaiting trial for something they have committed, correct?
Yes, sir.
But they have not pled yet.
They haven't or pled or haven't been set for trial. You know, we went a year without trying cases.
Got it.
Still arresting people.
Right. So these people have been out on their own recognizance
or on a PR bond.
Okay. And you're saying these people are knowing that probably, well, you didn't say this, so I'm going to make an assumption. These people are probably facing a decent amount of time in jail for what they committed. So they know they're doing it. They know they've got some free time before it comes. So you're saying these people are far more likely to go out there and commit more crimes, because why does it really matter if they're facing it anyway? Was that your point?
I do agree with that, but I would say it a little bit different. If we hadn't been in a COVID situation, they wouldn't be on the streets because their case would have already been resolved and they'd be in jail serving their time.
Got it. Okay. So basically, because of COVID put so much of a hold on this, we have a lot of people who are out, who are awaiting trial for facing serious time, who are just they don't care what they do because they're going to face it anyway.
Yes, they would.
Okay.
Yeah, but for COVID, they'd already be in jail.
Right. So how many people would you estimate that impacted during this COVID?
Harris County was keeping track, and they have a list of 130 to 150 people who were murdered by people who were out on bond already for 3, 4, 5, 6 different crimes. And one of them was out on bond for capital murder, which the Constitution allows you to keep them in jail, awaiting trial, and then they committed another capital murder. So just
what would cause a judge to allow a bond on a capital murder case? Because
right.
I'm not a judge, so I don't know, and I'm not a lawyer. But if I look at somebody who's facing a charge for capital murder, what causes a judge to allow them out on bond?
Well, let's don't assume that they're just being liberals and they're being left wing. Let's give the best light to them. The county jail is already full. It's full of very dangerous people, and they're trying to save the county money. I mean, you can't hold everybody. And so, I don't have an explanation for why somebody charged with capital murder was allowed to be out on bond, but they're trying to bend over and allow to help the county because the jail is already full. It's full of very dangerous people, according to the district attorney's office, and that those people don't need to be out of jail. And so they're trying to help the county so that they don't have to start shipping inmates to other counties as well. If we were in a regular situation, there would be a lot more people in jail in Harris County than there are. That's true for across the state. But they're trying to help counties with their fiscal budgets. And so I would say if we're going to give them the best light possible, they're trying to help their county out with their budgets. But then you throw in, well, they're just being ideologues. They're letting out people that are charged with very serious crime, and they're just erring too much on the side of letting people out and that's helping to cause crime increase.
Well, yeah, I think if you look at somebody who's facing a capital murder charge, regardless if they pled or not, that's really somebody who you do not want to then turn around and let loose back into society. Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good example of where we are. If we adopted the federal system, which is kind of similar to what you started with, is the judge makes a decision, release, detain. Well, in the federal system, they detain about 70% of the people arrested. We can't detain 70% of the people in Texas arrested. We have to find something that allows them out of jail, and we have to devise some kind of system that gets them to court so that we can get cases through the system. I know that we want to attack the private surety bail system, but it's the one that has the lowest failure to appear rate. It'll get your cases through the system quicker than any other system that's currently been or in the past tried. So I don't understand why we want to get rid of the one thing that gets cases through the system quicker. Now, we may want to attack it. We may say it's not fair for everybody, but it's the one that works the best. And we're wanting to get rid of it for some kind of concept of fairness, not a concept of whether it's constitutional, because it's been held constitutional. That just blows my mind. It's one thing to say, let's replace it with this thing that has been proven to work better. It is just crazy to say, well, it's just not fair, so let's get rid of it. We don't have anything that works nearly as well, but we just get rid of it. No, that's stupid.
Well,
and I didn't mean to say stupid. I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. So if the bail bond system is the only system that's set to work, if it's constitutional, right? How do you make it fair? So it treats the people who can't afford to pay bond the same as the people who can't afford to pay bond. You mentioned the hearings before, right, where you can go to in front of a judge and say, I can't afford it. And the judge may or may not lower the bond amount based on your plea. But at the end of the day, it's still a system that rewards people with money in their pockets versus people who don't.
Well, I disagree with that. I don't think it does. It's based a system based on what is your risk. I mean, I don't agree with a risk assessment, but bondsmen make determinations on who to bail out of jail based on risk, and we do it based on risk, not money. Judges are setting bail based on what the risk is, and when you have bail set and your risk established by your bail amount, the issue of whether you can afford it then has satisfied the constitutional requirements, and so it's a constitutional system. Now, if you want to talk about, well, then how do we address poor people who are first-time offenders or who are low-level offenders? How do we give them extra protection? Well, we've seen the rise of charitable bail funds. We have the ability to go in and ask for the court to reconsider. The court has the ability to give them a PR bond. I mean, I'll think of all those things. And you can't make a perfect system. I don't think we've talked or we've identified, and I don't think there is a system anywhere in the world that's perfect. And so I think what we have in the United States and what we have here in Texas is a good system that works well to give justice to victims. And I think we need to build off what works and not replace it with things that we know absolutely do not work.
All right, we're getting close on time here. No, I think this has been a really good discussion, but you had some other things on here that I know that you wanted to discuss, so I want to give you a chance to do that. I know you had also mentioned the defunding the push and how that was directly impacting potentially the homicide rate increase and everything else like that. So I definitely want to give you a chance to talk about that as well.
Well, and I appreciate you allowing me to talk about this movement, because I think that it is a very destructive movement. I think it has very many or a lot of similarities to things that we've already talked about, because I think that anytime, well, no, I think where this movement started was we were seeing in our country 6 months before any national election, we were seeing a push of the buttons of certain minority groups saying that you're being treated unfairly, and that and we need to have marches, need to have protests. And you can see 6 months before any national election for the last, let's say last 6 cycles, where that has happened. And then those people come out and they're getting made promises, and then they come out and they vote in larger numbers. And the problem is the politicians never followed through. And so then we see that party is now electing people that's drank the Kool-Aid, who stands up and makes the same promises and then goes to Congress and says, we're arguing for these policies. And one of those crazy policies that was being mentioned is that, the police are bad people. Police need to be defunded. We're voting in November in Minneapolis to get rid of the police department and replace it with something else that could include police. I mean, the segment of the population that defunding the police hurts the most is the very population that they are targeting to vote for it. I mean, this is minority on same minority crime. And it's now we're seeing Biden completely change gears, telling these same communities to use their federal dollars that they just got to refund the police. And because of increasing crime, you see the defund the police movement going away, almost going silent. Because to me, it's 1 + 1 = 2. Defund the police, smaller police group, increase crime. Because a police presence on the street causes people not to commit crimes when they see them. If you take them off the street, then crime is going to go up. It's going to go up dramatically. And that kind of brings me to, one of the arguments that I also make is, if you as a county government or you as a state government, if you're not going to provide the police protection that I need, so that if I need them and I call them, they can't come, well, then at the very least, allow me to own a firearm so that I can protect myself. I mean, it just makes common sense. If you're not going to provide the funds to have a police department that's going to protect me, Well, at the very least, allow me to protect myself and my own family. My goodness gracious.
No, you're right. You're 110% correct. The Second Amendment is incredibly important for that purpose alone, amongst many others. But the defund the police movement was a knee-jerk reaction after what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, and it was just an immediate. The only response to this has to be we need to defund the police. Do there need to be changes in the way we police? Yes. Defunding them completely is stupid. It's dumb. There is a legitimate service that the police force serve in our communities. And to say, oh, we just do away with them and we'll figure something out once they're gone is insane. And if you think that outcome is the criminals who are out there who are going to take advantage of this system, right? Because there's going to be this gap between when you defund the police and when you try to put in whatever new system you want to put in and when you do that, the criminals are just going to run rampant. So I believe there does need to be a change in the way that we police and the way that we handle people with mental illness and the way that we address those situations. I do believe there needs to be a change, but defunding them, no, is not the answer. And yes, there are bad eggs in police departments. There are police officers who abuse their power. There are police officers who do bad things. Do I believe that police officer murdered George Floyd by his knee on his neck? Yes, I believe he was directly responsible for the death of George Floyd. And then again, that's an opinion, and that's just based off what I saw when I was watching as little as I could about the trial. Now, does that mean every police officer is bad? No. Does that mean police in general are bad? No. Does that mean we should look at their practices a little bit, maybe change some things? Absolutely. Does that mean defund them? No. That is a knee-jerk reaction, and that does not make sense. To make your second point, when we talk about the Kool-Aid that they've been drinking, every single major city has been run by Democrat-run mayors and the majority Democrat city council members for as long as I can remember. And the majority of them have Democrat governors as well. And nothing has gotten better in the inner city. Nothing has gotten better. There has not been more funds put to programs that have been effective. There has been nothing, no change has been made in any of those inner cities to make them a better place to live. But when you talk about black on black crime or minority on minority crime, you're absolutely correct. The majority of those places are places of color. So the majority of those crimes are going to be crimes against people of color versus people of color. But it's been a failure of city government, of state government, of city councils to generation over generation, decade over decade. There has not been any positive change made in the inner cities by the same party. And I know we kept this fairly non-political, but I'm going to go there. The same party over and over again, who they vote for almost blindly. They support the Democratic Party, has done nothing to help them or make their lives any better. But I 100% agree with you. The answer is not to defund the police. We may need to reinvent some parts of how we police, but defunding it is bad. But I know we're getting quick out of time. I know Paco's probably got a million things to say.
Yeah, no, I got to go to a meeting, but great talking to you, Ken. And this with defund the police, it goes back to the other problems with the prison system and the bail system. You can't just defund the police. You have to have other things take place before you try to do anything with the police, or it's going to cause problems. Because I am a pro-abolitionist, but there is a plan of things that must happen before you even get rid of a police officer. You have to do things a certain way and have the right support systems for the communities to change, for crime to be adjusted before you try to get rid of the police, or it's not going to work. And that's what we have seen. And obviously, yes, the Democratic Party, they make millions of promises. People keep voting for them, and it's never going to change. It all comes down to the money. You know, the Democrats and Republicans, they take corporate money, and that's what they make their rules on, not what they promise to the people. But I got to go. You guys can keep talking. Thank you, and it was a pleasure, Ken.
Oh, thank you, sir. Very much enjoyed it.